welcome to my lecture. My name is Ivan Spijarskiy. I'm the head of publishing at FreePlay. Today we're going to talk about the state of hypercasual in Q1 2022, and we'll dig into details about hypercasual genres and see what is currently happening on the market. And all right, before we start, a few things, a few words about the terms I use and tools I use. So I use Sensor Tower. This tool is great for general overview on the market, getting estimated number of downloads and revenue for in-app monetization. And I also use Boutique Insights platform, also known as Scope Insights. So this tool is very useful for hyper-casual market. You can see all the prototypes coming out, and you can see how many prototypes and get some insights about where the market is heading right now. As for definitions, I'll be using the term hit game, and this one is quite tricky, so everyone has its own definition of what is a hit game, what is a successful hyper-casual game, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll be using it referring to the games that have reached 10 million downloads, and again, for the sake of simplicity, only on Google Play, which likely indicates that the game is successful. And there's also a small hit game term, which means that 10 times less scale for a game. And yeah, so that's it about the definitions. And here's a quick overview in the hypercasual market in general. Yesterday there was a cool action from Sensor Tower, so they've covered this pretty well, so you might want to check it if you haven't seen it once we get recordings. So I'm not going to dig too much into details. Market is currently struggling. That's the best word to describe it. We had a very unsuccessful Q3 where we had the first quarter where we fell. And before that, hypercasual was steadily growing, was really successful. 2019 and 2020 was also quite good. But Q3 showed us, 2021 showed us some first signs of decline. And Q3 was the first quarter where we dropped. After that, we recovered. Q4 was also really very successful. But overall, in 2021, the growth was not as good as everybody hoped, and we might see further decline in 2022. Here is a more detailed slide with the genres sliced. As you can see, the biggest three are runners, simulation combined with ultra-casual. I combine them because they are quite similar and it's hard to distinguish between them. And there's also puzzles, which all together are a backbone for hypercasual, and they compete with each other for the biggest number of downloads. So in Q4, most of them raised, and there's interesting. All of them have interesting reasons for that. We'll cover them a little bit later. Now, just a quick summary. So after extremely unsuccessful Q3, the market gained 25% Q4 to Q3, and this was a great recovery. But if we look at the picture in general, we'll see that the growth is slowing down. And when it comes to January 2022, compared to January 2021, the difference would be only like 1%. And we might see the market fall further in 2022. And anyway, the most genres boosted in December, in Q4 in general, and puzzles and arcades were the biggest growth, the biggest spike. And there's also an interesting, what's interesting about arcades, they spiked, they almost doubled, or maybe even more, and they matched actions for the first time in terms of popularity, and this was thanks to Squid Game, and we'll also talk about it a little bit later. Now, this is an interesting slide. This is based on Coop tool data. You can see here the number of prototypes coming out on the market every month, and the number of hits estimated coming out monthly as well. and it's hard to estimate hits because many games are published on 1 month and then they are scaled 5-6 months later. There are cases like that. So and also it's hard to see because not all of them reach 10 million on the first 1 or 2 months after they are published. So I had to approximately, had to approximate every one of them after like June or July, and even though I've made this approximation, it's still hard to predict how many hits we'll be getting from the games published in November, December. So I only have the number up until September. Now, as you can see, what's really interesting on this slide is that we had a really steep curve for prototypes, and there was a huge growth in prototypes coming out every month, and the peak was on April 2021. That's when we saw 4,478 prototypes, and after that the numbers started to fall down. And even though this huge number we had, the number of hits coming out in April were like 20. And if we, for example, compare it with April 2020, there were only 500 prototypes and the number of hits was 26. So there's no correlation between the number of prototypes coming out and the number of hits being published at the same months, which is really interesting. Because first it shows that the quantity does not equals quality, and this shows that the quantity strategy failed, and many publishers understood that, and they switched their strategies from getting as many prototypes as possible to hunting down the most potent teams, the most interesting teams on the market, and they focused on making more interesting games rather than doing as many prototypes and test as much as they can. And we'll see that the number of prototypes coming out is dropping, so a lot of teams are leaving the market right now because they were looking for a quick success, and it proved to be a difficult strategy. And a lot of publishers are not as much interested in financing these teams anymore. And also the games produced on the market are getting more and more complex, and it's more and more expensive to make these games. So Hypercasual is getting more mature and more like regular games, and that requires more difficult and time-consuming production. So naturally, the number of hits, the number of prototypes coming out is falling. Now, what's also interesting is that the trend for hits is also falling. We're not entirely sure yet, so it's quite hard to make a curve based on so few numbers. So we can say for sure that it's not growing, but as you can see, it might be even dropping right now. And there's an interesting theory, at least I have one, a theory that you will see in the next slides, that we have so many old games that are performing great right now, especially when it comes to puzzles. So new ideas, new games are struggling to get into the top charts because they have to compete with mature games, with bigger LTVs, and with in-app monetization. So it's hard for them to find their own place. And in a way, it resembles the situation we have right now in mid-core mobile market, where there's really a few new games coming out, and the market is dominated by old, super monetized, super polished games, where there's so much content that it's hard for a new game to compete with that. So at least I see this situation in puzzles, but we might eventually see other genres to come to this situation. So it might be a problem in the future, but not right now. Now, quick summary. So as you can see, the number of games, the number of prototypes does not equal the number of hits, and the quantity does not transform into quality, and also the competition raised greatly if we compare it to 2019, for example. But the amount of prototypes is falling for two reasons, at least two reasons, and well, there's also a decent number of downloads referring to old games, and I believe this number would only keep growing in the future. Now, let's dive into genres. Here is Runner's Traversal games, and as you can see, Runners and Traversal games are the backbone of the market. As when it comes to prototypes coming out, there's all these games. All games have a really broad audience, and the amount of downloads for the most successful games is really astonishing. So here I have numbers for prototypes coming out every day, and the amount of hits being published every month. And I took the latest months. I have data for where I can calculate and project the amount of hits, and I compare it with the number of prototypes coming out that were produced in that month, in September 2021 in our case. And by dividing these numbers, I can get a rough estimate, rough chance for a hit. And it's hard to calculate the amount of prototypes coming out, so I use the following method. And I take 3 days in September 2021. I manually calculate all the prototypes coming out and divide them into genres, and I can get the exact number of prototypes for these 3 days, and I then multiply it by 10 so I can get a monthly number. And in analytics, this is called sampling. So in my case, I have an X10 sampling. So bear that in mind. The number is not absolutely accurate, but it is more or less close to the actual one. So numbers. In September 2021, there were 42 prototypes for runners, and there were 5 hits, very successful months for runners. Which gives us a very small percent of success, 0.39. And because there's so many prototypes coming out in runners, this is really an overcrowded genre. The competition is strong, and it's like 40% of the whole market, of the whole amount of prototypes coming out. Everyone is trying to make a runner these days, but only few succeed. And below you can see the most successful runner games in 2020 and 2021 and their number of downloads. Interesting that we have in 2021 there are 2 the most successful runners produced by us. It's Joint Clash and Countmaster. Now the curve shows that even though that the genre is in general is a backbone, the genre is struggling. The number of downloads is falling, or at least it used to fall. It was falling in Q3. In Q4, there's a slight recovery, but in general, the opinion is that the market is struggling right now. There's a lack of new ideas, and here is a slide. I'd like to demonstrate what I actually mean. So this is an evolution of runners. You can see here, starting from Sky Roller, the beautiful. These are beautiful examples of runners, and the features they got. They were getting more and more complex. Everyone was bringing something new, some new ideas, some new features to the market, and eventually we are at the point where we no longer know. We don't have any more features to add. We don't know what people want. So we actually have a few ideas where this new generation of runners will go, and I'm absolutely sure that the runners would keep their evolution because they have a very wide audience. A lot of people want to play runner games, so there will still be a big audience demanding new games coming out. And for runners, they have many issues that we still have to solve. So there are issues with long-term retention rate and in-app monetization. There's hardly a good runner game with in-app monetization. So I believe that future generation of runners will focus on adding meta gameplay, not something like a simple meta, but an actual deep meta gameplay. And it might also introduce new gameplays merged into runner. And also, as I mentioned, they are struggling to have a good in-app monetization, but with meta introduction, we might see a good in-app monetization added as well. And also, runners don't have a persistent progression like a really good one. So we might also see persistent progression introduced into runners. Now, the market is waiting for these new ideas, so let's see how it goes. Let's see what will happen in 2022. If you have a good idea for what to add to a runner game, you can try. So the first one to find this new feature and new idea will probably have a very huge success because the market is big, the market is waiting for something. Now, arcades is an interesting case. They used to be pretty small, and there were not so many hit games coming out. But in Q4, there was a huge success. There was a huge success for arcades thanks to a trend, a trending series, Squid Game. And this trend affected not only arcades, but arcades were among the biggest games that grew because of this trend. And here is a number of prototypes in September, arcade prototypes. There were 25 prototypes a day, which makes almost 25% of the market. And there were 4 hits, which is quite good. So this gives us a rough estimate of 0.5% to make a hit. And below you can see the numbers for the most successful arcade games in 2020 and 2021. So note that September was just before the trend came out. So these numbers might change. As you can see, there's at least one game, Cookie Carver, related to the trend that made it to top 5 arcades in 2021. So we'll see it in the future. And here is a nice screenshot showing the top 10 games in Q4 2021 by download numbers, and I'd say 8 out of 10 are related to the trend to Squid Game trend. And this is just how much it affected the industry in general, and arcades in particular, but other games were also utilizing this trend as much as they can. It's just that arcades are a really wide genre, so you can make all sort of games, and it was the best fit for the trend. Now, actions. Actions is a difficult one. So they were big for some time, and especially at the beginning of 2021, there was a trend for first-person view shooters, and there were a lot of interesting games. Most notably, it was Hitmaster. But the genre has its specifics. So if you want to make a good action game, you should come up with a new, interesting, exciting way of killing enemies. And especially if we are talking about a first-person view shooter, and the industry quickly depleted all the possible ideas for how you can kill the monsters. So eventually we ran out of ideas, and now we're struggling to find a new concept. So as for numbers, there were 7 prototypes a day in September, not really much. But again, there was just one hit in September, so this gives us a 0.47% chance to make a hit. And as you can see, the numbers, they were quite big in 2020, but 2021 was not so good in terms of downloads for action games. And the question is whether there is a light at the end, as the concept relies heavily on the variety of methods of kicking your enemies. And there were so many designs that were used, and so were many mechanics. So the market is struggling to find a new idea. So I have some ideas. So you might want to look in 3 of these games that were quite trending in Q4. First is a draw weapon. It introduced a very fancy crafting system. So basically drawing, I'd say it's a crafting system in a nutshell. So it made the game very replayable. And the next one is Anglefy 3D. It showed that there might be a very different design, not just a first-person view. Sure, it's actually a turn-based action game in 2.5D, or if I can say that. And there's also a hand strike, which is probably the most interesting out of the 3. They introduced the concept of interactive scenes. So you control a hand, so you can grab a monster and interact with obstacles or some stuff on the level, and you can get a lot of different ways of killing your enemies using items you see on the level. So this makes a game really replayable, but at the price of the content you need. But this is an interesting concept, and you might want to check all these 3 games and see the ideas they have. Now, puzzles. Puzzles is a difficult genre, most notably because the lack of new ideas, and it was struggling, it was falling, and teams were moving out of the market because it was so hard to make a new idea. And as of September 2021, there were 8 prototypes a day, and there were just 1 hit, which makes us 0.41% chance of success. Now, numbers also dropped in 2021 comparing to 2020, but at the end of Q4, there was a raise in puzzles, and the question is there a hope? Because we see this steep curve at the end of the month, and the answer is probably no, because the biggest the race is attributed with all the old games, all the old puzzles, and here is the biggest contributors in Q4, and this is just a number of downloads for Q4 only. And this is Pull the Pin, Parking Jam, and Paper Fault. All these games are old. All these games are quite some time on the market. And the reason why they boosted so much, so some of them were probably all of them actually made progress in their in-app monetization, and they're now so they have a better in-app monetization now, and they have a better monetization strategy now. This helps them to sustain a higher CPI so they can buy more. And also they worked on their marketing strategies a lot. They have very interesting creatives, especially Pull the Pin. Their creatives are really different from what we used to see for pin games. Parking Jam also experimented a lot with their creatives, and they are very different from what they had before. And Paperfold just have really nice creatives in general. So all these games are heavily monetized. All these games probably have a higher CPI than we used to see in puzzles. That's why they can buy more. And this situation is some sort of resembles mid-core games where we struggle to see new concepts. and here in puzzles we almost see the same picture. And the question is whether the rest of hypercasual will go this way. But as for puzzles, the market is struggling to find new concepts, and it's harder and harder to make a new game in puzzle. And if you see what new games are coming out, they're probably almost all of them are content-based storyline puzzles, like delete one part, draw one part, and so on. So they are mostly content-based. It's not a new idea. It's an extension of an old one. Now, ultra-casual simulation, a very big genre, but also struggling, also falling. And as of September, there were 8 prototypes a day, which is not that much. And there were 2 hits, which is better than the previous 2, which gives us a chance of 0.9. However, in general, the number of downloads is falling slowly. And the reason for that is that people are getting tired of simple mechanics. And in general, there are a lot of simple mechanics we can use, but it's no longer enough to entertain the user, entertain and retain it. So there is a way out of it, and there are interesting examples I'd like to show you so you can get some ideas where the market might go in the future. The first one is a Makeup Master. It's not really a hyper-casual game in a way we are used to, but it's heavily monetized. It has a strong in-app monetization, and you can utilize it for your own ideas. The second one is Anti-Stress Relaxation Toys. It's an example of a multi-mechanic game. So there's a lot of different mechanics in it, and you can probably follow the same example. You might want to try mixing different mechanics in your game, and Handicraft is an really interesting example where they have a lot of simulation mechanics wrapped around the core gameplay, which is actually MH3. And this is a really strong new idea of combining monetization, like a gameplay that can give you strong monetization and strong retention rate, and rapid with simulation games which can give you a good CPI. So it's an interesting concept. Now, the last one, the others genre, the future of hyper-casual. And I don't have much more time left, so let's make it really, really quick. So the numbers in September 2021 were 15 prototypes a day and 2 hits a month, which gives us 0.44 chance. And this is probably the only genre where we see a steady growth. And what's interesting about it that this growth is attributed with so-called hybrid casual concepts and arcade idols, which are popular right now. And this 3 beautiful examples of these games. So My Little Universe is absolute champion in terms of in-app monetization. This project is so successful in this, so you might want to play it and see how you can make a strong monetization. This one is really good. And Stone Miner is a hybrid champion. It's probably the most successful game in terms of downloads for hybrid casual in 2021. Also strong monetization, in-app monetization, and it has really strong metrics. So it's a good concept. And finally, Moon Pioneer, one of the first arcade idols we saw in the market. So this is the current trending idea, the trending theme for hybrid casual, and you want to check it out, play it, and think of other ideas in arcade idols. And this genre has a lot of potential in the future, and it will probably be one of the few genres where we'll keep seeing the steady growth. Now that's all of it. Short summary for the market in general. The market is struggling, so there's a lot of problems in different genres, but some of them have a good future. And this future is attributed with extensive in-app monetization, combination of different mechanics, merging genres between each other, getting more and more complex games in general, and following trends. So In the end, I think 2022 might not be as bad as some may predict, and there's still light at the end of the hyper-casual market. All right, thank you very much. We're out of time, so feel free to hit me on Telegram with additional questions. Thank you for coming up today.